Afternoon, everyone. I know it's been a long time since I've made a video, but I'm back. Took my exam a couple days ago, so I won't know if I passed for like 8 weeks, but I'm just glad it's over. I'm glad, studying all day is over. And now it's on to Malifaux. ITC coming up in like 2.5 weeks. I did a podcast with Travis and the team over on Max Value Podcast, so check that out if you want to hear us all talk about it. On this particular video, I didn't know what to like come back to. I obviously I said I've been out of making videos for a while, and I haven't played Malifaux in about a month, which is it's fine. It's not like I forget how to play, but I'm gonna get a couple games in the next couple weeks just to get me back into groove. Preparing for ITC. As you guys know, it's a team tournament, 5-man teams. I will be the Gremlin player. Technically, I don't have to declare that I always play Gremlins, but we all know I'm going to play Gremlins. As you know, going in, I have 3 favorite masters as far as Gremlins are concerned: Zip, Wong, Sommer. For this particular event, I imagine I'm going to be playing a lot of Sommer, maybe some Wong. I don't plan on playing any Zip, unless for some reason I just have to. But big reason being, I felt the Rooster nerf hurt Zip the most, and not that he's a bad master or anything, but I feel like my play with him isn't as strong as with the other two. Partly because he does tricky things, but I think Sommer is still just so good. Here's my thing: if Wong is very, in my opinion, he's not hard to use for me. He he's not the easiest, but he's not the hardest either, and he does what he does really well. I mean, when Wong is on point, he's so hard to play against. But Sommer, in my opinion, is the classic. If you are better than your opponent and you can think a lot better, he is so much better of a tool to have than like Zip, because things not as much goes wrong with Sommer, in my opinion. He has tools for every situation. He can kind of, in the middle of a game, depending on what your opponent does, you can react and assess the situation. And so I think if you have a better, higher level understanding of how the game's going, Sommer just gives you more options. On top of that, and this video will be more towards how ITC does pairings and strategies and all that. Another reason I believe I'll be playing Sommer more is because the way ITC works is they're going to give you 5 tables with different strats and schemes on each one. Now, we don't know how it's going to work as far as, is it going to be something like, oh, there's 2 interference tables, 2 collective bounties, and a stake a claim? Are they all 5 different? Or, it's 4 and 1? Are they, to what level they're going to be different? Because, it's kind of layers upon layers that I'm trying to talk about. So maybe I should just go all the way with it and then come back to the strategy part. So, there's 5 tables. We don't know how they're going to be laid out. Each table is going to have scenario, strat scheme, table layout, and then once we know the 5, we get as a team and we pick 5 masters from 5 different factions secretly. We then go up against the other 5 people. We have our 5 masters. They have their 5 masters. We don't disclose what they are at that point. Some team becomes player A by flipping card. Then Team A will say, all right, it's on table 1. It starts at table 1, whichever strat scheme that one is. We will put up 2 masters. Team B will put up 1 master to counter our 2. And then we will pick which one of our 2 masters we want to play their master, right? So the first thing that really gets me about this is usually... So I've done ETC pairings before, which is a Warhammer version of this. So let me explain the Warhammer version, and then we'll compare it to the version I just said. So as I said, I'll reiterate this one. In this version, Team A puts up 2, Team B puts up 1. Team A picks which of the 2 it wants to play the other one. In the Warhammer version, Team A puts up 1, Team B puts up 2, and then Team A picks which of the 2 that it wants. Now, one thing that's different about Warhammer is, besides terrain and stuff, I guess in the later ETCs that I didn't attend, they did have very mild scenarios. But for the most part, it wasn't like strats and schemes as polarizing as it is in Malifaux, where it was a lot about the matchup, right? It was like, oh shit, that list is good versus my list. I don't want to play it, like counter matchups. Malifaux is not the same way, and it really does decrease the value of pairings in general because, Malifaux is made to be played that you can walk up and pick from your entire faction of masters and models and play the game. It's not like going to a tournament with a set list and being like, all right, I need to be able to handle everything with this list, or I hope I avoid this bad matchup. And, that was a big metagame back in Warhammer 2. There were times where I'd be like, all right, I'm playing this super aggressive, punch you in the face army. I hope I avoid the shooting list. And if you were lucky and the other good players, didn't bring the shooting list, or they lost early in the tournament or tied, or you just got paired against them, didn't get paired against them, you'd be pretty lucky, and then you could win the tournament off the back of that. That's a whole other game. So the one reason I like the Warhammer version a little bit more is on the defensive side. So it gives Team A a little bit more, right? So the ITC way, if both teams want X master to play in a certain thing. So here's a good example. Let's say the first table's interference. Interference. So they can say, all right, I got a great master for interference. Let's say I got Sommer, right? Sommer is a great master for interference. And the B team says they have a great master for interference too, Ramos, right? In the ITC version, we go, all right, Team A, we put up Sommer and we put up something else, Nicodem, right? Who also happens to be good at it. The B team puts up their Ramos, who's good at it. All right, now we say, all right, we wanted Sommer to play it anyway. Sommer's on playing interference, Ramos is playing interference. Both teams got what they want. Let's put it up the other way, right? The Warhammer way. Team A puts up Sommer because we like Sommer interference. Great, we have that advantage. B team now has to have two different masters that are good at interference. Okay, they put up Ramos. Let's say for some reason they didn't pick a second master that was good at interference. And they have to put up, I don't know, Vix or something. I don't know if they're good or not at it. Let's say Perdita, whatever. So now they have their Ramos who's good at interference, their Perdita who's not that good at it, but it's the Sommer player's choice who they play, so they pick Perdita knowing that they have the advantage in the strat and schemes. And the B team, that's a mistake they made in the pairing process. They didn't pick two masters that could possibly do that interference and go from there. So as you can see right away, that's the biggest problem inherently with the ITC version is there is no, like, if the 5 strats and schemes are very polarized, collect the bounty, interference, what's the other one I think is very polarized? Headhunter can be as well, right? If my team of 5 people just closes their eyes and says, all right, this scheme pool is perfect for X master, this one's perfect for Y, this one's perfect for Z, all down the tables, and you just say, and in Malifaux, and you just say, all right, my master's great at this scheme pool, Hamlin, right? Hamlin's going to be great at this pool, no matter who I face. Then the pairing process pretty much doesn't matter at all, right? The only thing that matters is if there's some random master that's really good versus Hamlin, and no matter what pool, then the enemy would have to predict and take that master, and also want to use them on that table, and then it happens to come up. And even then, there's not that many, in my opinion, polarizing matchups where people are like, I can't play it. It's impossible. Especially because, to take a step further back is when I go up to a table of Malifaux and somebody announces Outcast and I announce, or that's a better example, Guild, and I announce Gremlins, I automatically have to worry about Sonya, right? For Blast. So a lot of times, most of my crews will take Maris just in case, right? Just in case they bring up Blasty Master. Now, she's a great model all the time for the most part, so it's not like, oh god, this sucks, I'm taking this piece. But now in ITC, I guess Kaladi, a lot of people say is bad versus Blast, and they don't really have any anti-Blast, tech to put in like a Maris, right? But if somehow Kaladi gets paired up versus a Blaster, just play, like, if you play the bags of props Kaladi or the one that's not like the tight ball, then you kind of like don't give a shit, right? You already know you're going to be a blaster, so just play around it and build your crew around it, right? So a big feel people have is I built this crew of all minions and I don't have any anti-blast things. Oh shit, they played Sonya, I'm in some shit. But if all you picked was Kaladi, and you can play him in different styles, then it really is to your advantage, if anything, to know if you're up against a Blasty Master or not, because you can make a list that's good versus a Blasty Master or good versus a normal Master who might not have as many, right? So that's like my initial, where it's like there are some bad, quote-unquote, bad matchups, but it's very unlikely it happens, because you got to think about it from the opponent's side as well, right? It's very easy. So let's say my strategy is to just say, all right, here's 5 scheme pools. We have 5 masters that are perfect in these scheme pools. We're just going to audit with the pairings. No matter what happens, we're going to get the 5 masters we want, right? If it's table 1 and we want Sommer there and we go first, we put Sommer and X. They put up whatever, we pick Sommer. If it's the other way around, they put up 2 masters, we pick Sommer. We don't care which one he plays, right? We get every table we want every time. Warhammer way, it's more of a risk. You have to be able to have people that play different tables, and then being the one to pick first is a bigger deal. Because then if I put up Sommer, and they only have one good master that they chose into that interference, they are screwed in that case. They have a disadvantage, and it was because of the pairing process and being smart. In this ITC, it's hard to lose in the pairing process unless you like actively are bad at picking masters, and you just happen to pick, like, oh shit, we didn't pick any masters good at interference, and there's an interference pool that we saw there. Oh shit. You know what I mean? Like, that's when it could get bad. So I think it really takes away. So I think the pairing process itself takes away from strategy. To even add on another layer, right? You don't know what masters they have at the start. I don't know why masters aren't revealed. Like, that would be, if I had to make one change to ITC right now, and besides the pairing process, most people probably wouldn't care if it changed, it would be that you reveal the 5 masters. Because that at least get you some thinking of some strategy. Now you're going in blind. Like, your best bet at the first pairing process, right? The first pairing process, when you're Team A, your best bet is to pick 2 masters, one that's really good at the table, and a second one that's pretty good at the table, but only if, like, the master that the enemy picks up is like a direct counter type thing, right? That's it. That's the only, because you don't know what the other masters have. There's no, like, thinking of strategy of, like, oh shit, if we put up this one, we won't have them to counter on this table, blah, 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 blah. But even so, even if you knew the 5 masters, there's very little reason to do that. Because as I said, in Malifaux 1, there's not that many counter matchups. And 2, all you know is the master. You don't know the list. You don't know anything else, right? So just knowing the master it's not that helpful. It's helpful, but it's like what they build in their crew could be vastly different depending on what they feel like doing at the time. So this is where the pairing process, I think, really breaks down and becomes pretty much irrelevant. It's whatever. Your best bet is just to pick, 5 masters that are good at the table, and then have them play it out and hope that you're a better player. That's just how it works. Now, it will create a little more tension in games because, let's put, for example, Gremlins are not that good at Reckoning, in my opinion. I think it's one of their weakest ones. Collect the Bounty can be hard as well. They can surely win in it, but it's not one I favor as a Gremlin player. But now, unless there's 5 Reckoning rounds, I will never have to play Reckoning, right? Unless there are 5, unless everything is Collect the Bounty and Reckoning, I can guarantee I never play Reckoning. I can play I might play multiple interferences and Reconnoiters if that's how it's set up. I don't want to influence how Mike is doing his tables. I don't care, because there's good and bad ways to both sides. I'm just saying from the side I'm seeing is, wow, Gremlins can be really good at Stake a Claim. And it's probably a good chance that if there's multiple rounds with Stake a Claim, I will play it as the Gremlin player. See what I'm saying? If there are multiple rounds with interference in it, I will probably get to play interference multiple times. I will probably never play a Collect the Bounty or Reckoning round. I guarantee I play mainly interference, Stake a Claim, and squatters if they're there. If they're there, I'm probably the first pick to play. Now, if there's both there, that's when you create a little a little more strategy, right? But that's just from a Gremlin perspective, Obviously, if there's two people good at collect the bounty, then it creates some strategy of, who's going to play collect the bounty, who's going to play the other ones. And then there's things like turf war extraction, guard the stash, which are kind of basic ones. And a lot of, almost every faction has at least something good into it. It's not as polarizing as the other ones. So that's kind of like going in where there's so many unknowns that you almost have in the way that the pairings work, there's no way to really get a leg up on the pairings, right? You're better, and you don't even know who the fucking people are that are playing the other masters, right? Because that's apparently announced at the end too. Which doesn't really matter for us because we don't know many of the players over there. But it's kind of nice to know. We did a similar team event already back in last year in June. And what ended up happening was we just paired player skill. So you're all right, if you got your weakest player versus their strongest, you say, all right, we're going to lose that round, but now their strongest player is basically taken out. All right, now we want to put our third best versus their worst, assuming that he can beat him. And now we have our two best players versus their middle of the pack players. That should give us 3 wins. We win the round, right? That's a good strategy. Now, if you had when the strategy really mattered, if your weakest player could beat their weakest player, then you're in a great position because you kind of win the ace matchup, and then you just have to win 2 of the other 3, apparently, if you're equal skilled. But that's besides the point here. We don't know player skills. We're just going to go and assume we're the best anyway. And we don't have what I would call a super weak player that needs to be coddled in the matchup. So that's always a plus here. But that's kind of what Malifaux pairings come down to sometimes is player skill, because so much happens after the fact. And like I said, a lot of this is just because of the game of Malifaux. I mean, hell, the only thing different now is the fact that we get to know the master ahead of time, and that creates its own metagame, in my opinion. And I was trying to think of it, if masters were known ahead of time, all the time in Malifaux, right? Let's just say in Malifaux you had to pick your masters, and then you reveal them, and then you pick crews. Which masters would seriously be hindered versus this? Where would the tier list move if this happened, right? And masters, I think Black Sea masters might be a little bit more weaker. I think Neverborn would probably get a little weaker. Because Neverborn, in my opinion, have very strong masters, right? Masters themselves. I think compared to Gremlins, for example, who have, I'm not saying their masters are weak, but if just them sitting on their own, it's a lot different than a Pandora and a Kaladi, as opposed to a Samur and a Wong, right? This is my thoughts. So I don't really give a shit if you know that I'm playing Samur. All right, I'm going to have Bayous, I'm going to summon some things, part of my list. But at the end of the day, he can do everything and he can beat you even if you know. I've said before, I've taken Samur to a tournament and only brought him and used the same list 5 times in a row. And they knew my list. The people who I played, who are good top American players, knew my exact list for rounds 4 and 5. It didn't matter. I still won because he's just that good in game, and you have to play the game. There's no inherent thing you're gonna take versus me that is gonna be so shocking I can't win, right? Where I think maybe Masters and Arcanist and Neverborn, if you know they're coming, you can kind of maybe put some tech in there to help counter it, but there's always that chance you don't know. I think Arc is a great example because you have a master like Ramos who will be summoning spiders. He's probably going to take Josh. He's going to take armor. There's always a chance they do the noobish arachnid Howard thing, but that's armor anyway, right? So ahead of time, a lot of the shit he's going to take, or the theme of his crew. The same with Marcus. You're probably not going to see, armor Marcus. You're not going to see Marcus with all the spiders and shit. Right? Let's just be fair. So, but there's always that fear when you play Arcs that you take all this anti-armor and then they play Marcus and you kind of wasted a lot of points on stuff you're not going to use. But if you know their master, if they play Marcus, you can be all right, I don't need as much anti-armor. He might have a couple models that have armor. But if you play Ramos, then you're like, oh, I'm going to play Wong with 3 glowy things, and it might be to your advantage at that point. So what was an advantage before of like having such different masters, because Gremlin masters aren't that fucking different, in my opinion. I mean, unless you count like Ulix, who has like pigs, then it's all like, all right, it's going to be Sommer with a lot of good models. It's going to be Zip with a lot of good models. It's going to be Wong with a lot of good models. They're all slightly different, but they're just going to take a lot of good models, and as opposed to the Marcus Ramos type experience, and maybe even Neverborn, where if they have Kaladi or Lilith, like what things you got to worry about. Maybe Lenny's really bad versus. I mean, he's not that great versus Neverborn in general, but let's say, oh, he's really bad versus Lilith because he's so easy to swap with Blue Power 1. Well, now against Lilith, so you got to worry about swap, so you take things that are good against the swapping mechanism, or that don't care as much. So I think there's a nice metagame there. And as I was alluding to before, and maybe I kind of went off topic, was in ITC, if I'm playing a tournament now and I play against Guild in Interference, I think I automatically have an advantage because Guild are weak against Interference. Stake a Claim versus maybe Outcasts aren't that great against Stake a Claim, so I automatically have an inherent, leg up because I'm playing Gremlins is good at it. Same way the other way, I think Outcast and Collective Bounty versus Gremlins is usually better for Outcast. So there are some faction disparities in certain strategies, right? I think we all can agree that and I'm saying counters, I'm saying disparities where Gremlins just tend to be good at Stake a Claim because of how fast and reckless they are and Pick-a-Pulse and stuff, right? So whenever you play Stake a Claim against a Gremlin, a lot of factions are at disadvantage. Now, let's think of it in terms of ITC. If there's only one Stake a Claim game, and you have 5 masters on the other side, 5 people, if 4 people don't like playing, it's easy to have you're going to play a master that's good at it. You're going to pick somebody who's good and a faction that's good at it, right? So every matchup within themselves is going to be a master that should be good at the pool, which in turn means that from one side of the thing, like if I'm really good at Stake a Claim behind Gremlins, I'm probably going to play somebody else who's good at Stake a Claim, and then the power level is kind of evened out because of that. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense there. Where, before, if all they had was B tier in Stake a Claim and I have A tier, I'm at an advantage. But now, because they are such a wide amount of masters to choose from on the other side, because they get multiple factions and they get to choose who plays Stake a Claim, there's going to be some A tier master they're going to pick to play mine. Mine might be better, I might be a better player, but, you're not going to randomly get some shitty guild master into Interference, most likely, because they're going to pick the Rezer or some summoner of your own, right? You have that many choices to pick from. Somebody's going to play a summoner, right? Now, there's choices going down the way, if there's multiple Interference games or there's, a Stake a Claim Interference squatters, you can't have everybody everywhere. But, for the most part, you should be playing Comfort. I think schemes will play a big part. I think being good enough at the game, so there's not that much time preparing, but a lot of it is like just thinking deep about the schemes and the deployment and the strat and being like, do I have a plan going into this game that's really effective? And that, because it's great to say, oh, I'm good at Stake a Claim because I'm Gremlins, but if it's like close deployment Stake a Claim with all killy strat schemes, you might be like, oh wait, I'm actually not good at that. So there's levels to it, and I always say that Malifaux, one of the good things about the game, but also something that makes it hard for new players versus good players, is there's so many levels to lose at in Malifaux between picking your master, picking your schemes, list building, deployment, first turn moves, that they're going to fail at some point and then just be overshadowed by the better player. Same here. At the end of the day, I just think good play is going to win the day. As it should. I don't like that you can put whatever master you want on every table easily. I don't like that masters aren't revealed because I feel like it takes away some of the pairing process. Because, we've been talking and with the other B team and whatnot, and we're just thinking of the idea of, well, what if we just pick 5 people and we put them at the table we want them to blindly? What's the worst that could happen? Okay, let's just say the worst that could happen is you put Kaladi at a table and they bring up, I don't know, Sandeep and Sonia, whatever, I don't care, the blasty bitch. And then you're like, oh shit, I got countered almost, right? But what's the chance of that happening? They don't know that you have him until you put him up. They would have to pick those 2 masters, right? They would have to pick those 2 masters for the table you're at, and they're probably doing the same strategy as you are, where you're thinking maybe taking some generalists and maybe a couple counter matchups. Not even counter, but just like skewy matchups, right? Oh, I see a collect the bounty, close deployment. I'm going to take the VIX, or reckoning close deployment. I'm going to take the VIX. They're not really a generalist faction, but they're really good at that one. So, while I do think there is some strategy there, I think if you're more likely just to get like fuck yourself than to the enemy to outsmart you in pairing. I think you're more likely that the cuter you get, and you try to be like super creative, there's just one, there's not the avenue to be super creative, and 2, without knowing anything about your opponent's factions ahead of time, or even what masters they have like in reserve, the pairing strategy is just blind and hoping at that point. So you are better off just picking somebody that's really good in general, that can do whatever the schemes are, and then just saying, whatever, maybe the matchup is 50-50, but I'm the better player, instead of some convoluted, pairing scheme where you get a 55-45 matchup, but it like would have to take kind of lucky for it to come together. I think, this is just the inherent nature of how Malifaux works with the building a crew before the game automatically makes this type of pairing process tough and mean less, right? ITC probably wouldn't be any different if every team was just like, all right, pick a master, put a faction at every table, and then play a normal game of Malifaux, right? Here's the 5 tables. Pick your 5 players, your 5 factions, put them face down at every table, reveal them. Here you go, play your games as if a normal game of Malifaux happened. Or ranking everybody 1 to 5. There's several things you can do, but it's all like kind of random in the end, right? And that's kind of my thoughts of the pairing process and my thoughts of like how things are going to go. I think we'll do fine. We're going to say we're going to win, but there's no guarantee in that. I do think we'll have a good shot. Because with team games like this, we're bringing 5 very good players from America, right? If we play even a team with 3 good UK players, right? Here's a scenario. 3 good UK players and then 2 shitbags, friends, because they're a club. And then we have 5 solid players, right? Well, if we pretty much if there's in Malifaux, if you're really bad, you're probably going to lose. So if their 2 shit players are going to lose their games automatically to any of our 2, right? That just means it's 3 good players versus 3 good players, where only one of us has to win for it to matter. That sounds like pretty good odds to me. Now, if they bring a team of 5 great players and we have 5 great players, it becomes a fight. But for every bad player you have on your team, it's just so hard to like win around. Like if you have a player, it's just the way to think. If you have A tier players and then 2 B tier, and some team has A tier, you better hope to God that something happens that you win, like all the A tier matchups. Having weak players just hurts so bad in this kind of system. And, it happens. We don't know much about the UK players. I've heard some names here and there. But even then, who's to say the number 1 player in the UK is what I would call like super special. I'm sure he's a great player. I don't know who he even is ranked number 1 right now. I'm sure they're fine. I've played good players over here as well. You know, until I watch them play, I don't know if I'm going to be impressed or not, right? You know, this had to do with coming from Warhammer. Where I'm coming from is this: I played Warhammer and I played in Europe for the America team for 5 years. And in the first time we went, we're like, we don't know how good anyone is, right? We go over there, and they have some good players, and they do some cool strategies and stuff. I think Warhammer had more advantage because we play the same game here and there, right? It's Malifaux. Same scheme, same strat, same everything. In Warhammer, we had to change the rules a bit to balance the game out, and all Europeans played Eurohammer, as we'll call it. We'll call it Eurohammer, right? America didn't play a lot of it. Now, our team that went over there had to practice it, but we didn't get to play a lot against it beforehand. We relied on a lot of information from our friends over in Europe on what was good and what was bad. On top of that, lists were preset, right? We had to send in our lists, and we couldn't change them. It's not like Malifaux where you can adapt. You know, if we could go over there, look at everybody's list and be like, oh, we're going to change ours on the fly, then that's different, right? Malifaux is just a different game. I think that was a big advantage for the Europeans. And we adapted. I mean, we never won the event, but and a lot of that had to do with we couldn't get 8 of the best players over there at once. It was very difficult to get the 8 best U.S. players onto a team and over into the. Now we put up some good fights. We usually lost to the best of the best teams, like the Polands, the Italys, but we crushed our fair share. And me personally, you know, I think I had 1 losing record in 5 years, and we'll consider that an army failure. But really, I went over, I played against great players, and I've done well, and I've lost, and I've beat them. You know what I mean? Like, I've played the best of the best in Warhammer, and they're still just humans, and yes. But, and then let's translate that. I guess where I'm going with this is, let's take Malifaux. It's a smaller game, right? The competitive community is smaller than Warhammer was. There haven't been, huge international events. So, when Warhammer, quote-unquote, died to us because of Age of Sigmar, we went to Malifaux. If you look at the rankings on usrankings.com, actually, while we are talking right now, I will bring up the US Malifaux rankings, right? And I'm just going to look at the top, let's say, 15 people, right? Let's just look at top 15. Sam was not a Warhammer player that I know of. Jay, nope. 12 was a Warhammer player. He went to England. All right. Okay, so there's a big gap. So let's look at 6. 6, 4, 3, 2, 1. Right? So everyone with this Max Wildenhouse guy was a USA Warhammer player. 5 of us went to Europe, and Jacob Brandon never went to Europe because he was in college, but he did win the US Masters the last one of the years, right? So, and we've all been playing Malifaux for not a horrendous amount of time, 2 years. So all the good Warhammer players moved to Malifaux, and then they became the top Malifaux players, along with others who were in the mix as well, right? And the rankings aren't a perfect filler of that, but I mean, I think it says something, of top players moving to a game, and they become top players in another game, and these are top players. Europe, we don't see that as much. The only player I know from any sort of other game would be Craig Johnson, who is a top UK Warhammer player who dabbles in Malifaux here and there and wins once in a while, right? So if Craig can come in and out and be amazing, and he's one of the best, then I don't know how good the best Malifaux players without him are. Does that kind of make sense? I'm not saying they're bad. And if you took all the Warhammer players back out of the rankings, right? But you knew that if I played, I'd be the best. One of the best. Right? Then it's hard to... You guys, I don't know if you guys are getting this. It's just hard to gauge how good they are. Just because you're the best in a community, if your community is not full of good players, top players, then it doesn't matter. Then being the best is just, you're still going to be second to somebody who's better, who's good. Does that make sense? I think that makes sense to me. I think it makes sense. Now, and as I said, I don't know how good I don't know if their best players are just guys who play a lot that are really good, or if they're really tactically minded people. Because because I firmly believe in Malifaux, and a lot of games are. There's only so much you can do. Like there's a cap on a lot of players' skill, and it's not about playing more games. It's just about how well you can think, and are you strategically minded, right? There's a lot of things I've played guitar and then I've stopped doing it because I just knew I was like, this is not something I can do. Could I have played enough? Could I practice and play enough to be okay? I probably could, but I knew that the way I thought and the way that I didn't feel music, I kind of just played it like a machine. Like, oh, it tells me to put my hand here, then I put my hand here. Right? I knew that my cap on guitaring was not that high. And I think the same is in more games as well. Some people think differently. You know, can you think 3 turns ahead of Malifaux of where this model is going to be and what the enemy's going to do? Can you look at a situation and unscramble it in a short amount of time given the amount of games? One reason I like playing Sommer is because I think of him as a big puzzle. And because of that puzzle, I have an advantage over my opponent because not only do I get to figure out how to play my master, it's not as obvious to them as to what I'm going to do. So it's harder to play against, right? When you play against the Vix and it's like, oh, I'm going to charge you and kill you. Well, we both know what's going to happen, and now it can be almost a coin flip. But the harder you make your internal crew for yourself, the harder it makes for your opponent to play against it, which automatically gives you a leg up, assuming you can think at a higher level than your opponent. And I think that's why I like Sommer so much, is it makes the game more difficult for both players. And now I have more of an advantage, in my opinion, than if we both just play like Vix and like even Wong. I think Wong sometimes is very straightforward, and he's good and he can win. But there's a point where I'm just like, man, I'm not gaining a lot of like advantage from playing him to an extent. Like I feel like there's a deeper level that some other masters give, and even I think Zip has that level too because he's so tricky with places and stuff. Anything with pushes, places, like the more of that kind of shit you get in your crews, the harder it is for enemy to unravel it, and then it's harder for them to like play against it. And now they're not only thinking of their own crew, they got to think of how to counter yours. And if it's very difficult, then it could just they have more reasons to mess up. Like Raspy is kind of like there's only so much you can do with her, to the point that if the enemy knows what they're doing, you might not have as many options. I don't know. That was just an example. I think that's it. I think I kind of just rambled a lot about ITC and how I think about the game. I'm really excited to meet these guys. I know we talk a lot of shit over here in America, but I think it makes it more fun, right? I'm not going to go over there. If we lose, I'm not going to like cry and like not talk to anybody. But at the same time, it's more fun to have confidence than when you go over and everybody's like, well, you're going to win. This doesn't matter. We didn't try and blah, 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 blah. It's kind of like at a tournament when people give up before they even play. You're like, well, fuck, that takes away my fun. Not only that, it kind of degrades my win because now the worst part is when people are like, oh, I'm just going to lose. Well, now I have 2 things that can happen. 1, I win the game and you already gave up anyway, so, oh, I lost anyway. Or 2, I lose the game and then it's 10 times shittier for me because you pretty much gave up and then I ended up losing, right? So I hate when people do that, but that's besides the point. It seems like they're good guys over there ready to shit talk with us. We're going to do our best. I hope for good games. You know, as I said, a lot of it's just unknown. I can't make assumptions. I'm not easily impressed in gaming, right? So just because just because I'm number 1 on US, who cares? Just because a couple of their guys are claimed to be really good by other players, until I see it, I can only take your word for it so much, you know. Do you take the word of a, guy who golfs out of his backyard on who the best golfer is just because for some random reason, right? You got to go against them and be like, wow, that guy is actually really good. And we're going to see what happens over there. I'm hoping America takes it. I firmly believe we can be top 3. I will be very disappointed if we're not top 3. Very disappointed. Because I feel like we have the players to do it. I probably will make a video or 2 before that. I got some games coming up this week just to get me back in the groove. Probably some Sommer, just to get him ready, because I think he's the hardest to play with that when you've been away from the game for a while. I'll be back around, guys. Thanks for listening.